This series contains adult language and depictions of graphic violence. Listener discretion is advised. So, what do you do with the idea that a ghost is potentially responsible for the deaths of 5 innocent people? 5 people tangentially connected, but most importantly, killed under nearly identical circumstances. Would that be enough to make you believe that such a thing is possible? Further, where would this alleged curse from a ghost come from? Should we consider it to be the work of an unsettled spirit, or, as in this case, the transference of a curse from a person to an object? The object in question is a tombstone, and the person buried beneath it is one Carl Pruitt. Welcome back to The Devil Within. You're listening to the mysterious case of Carl Pruitt. I'm back from vacation, and I'll have a full report about what I found and didn't find next week. And I'm sorry that this episode is late, but I was driving home all day yesterday and didn't get around to recording and editing. Plus, I need to apologize for the sound quality of the earlier episode this week. I recorded it in my car in the parking lot of the hotel we were staying at. So, my apologies. But for now, I have another quick hit about a truly shocking case that I'll eventually do a much deeper dive on. So consider this an appetizer. Pulaski County is located in a rural area of southern Kentucky. Sparsely populated, and it's what's called a dry county, meaning no alcohol is allowed to be sold within the borders of Pulaski County. In 1938, the year our story begins, there were approximately 40,000 people living within the almost 700 square miles that the county covers. Carl Pruitt was born in the early years of the 20th century. He grew up poor and with few prospects of breaking the cycle of poverty that his family had endured since before the Civil War. Although he was constantly struggling to make ends meet, his problems were made a little easier to bear when he found the love of his life and got married. But all of that would come crashing down one spring evening in June of 1938. Carl arrived home earlier than expected and found his wife in bed with another man. At that moment, something in Carl snapped. His primary concern wasn't the man in his bed. The focus of Carl's rage was his wife. He instantly attacked her, which allowed the interloper to escape out the bedroom window, leaving his illicit lover at the mercy of an enraged husband. It seems Carl went into a blind fury, completely under the control of a quickly deteriorating mental state and bent on murder. He grabbed the nearest weapon he could find, a length of chain he had been repairing that belonged to a piece of farming equipment he owned. Carl took that length of chain and strangled his young wife to death. As he calmed down and came to his senses, Carl realized what he had done and sank further into a dangerous state of mind. He retrieved his pistol from the bedroom and, in his grief and anger and shame, took his own life with a .38 slug to the temple. Understandably, the wife's parents couldn't stomach the thought of their deceased daughter spending eternity beside the man who killed her, so they insisted that Carl be buried in a different, more remote cemetery, so that they might have a modicum of peace when they visited their loved one. So Carl Pruitt was buried in that out-of-the-way cemetery in Pulaski County, and that should have been the end of a tragic story. But incredibly, it was just the beginning. The first bit of weird news was that there seemed to be a pattern forming on the marble of Carl's tombstone. Something about a strange discoloration that occasionally affects stone when exposed to the elements, and it grows like a fungus would grow. But this one grew in the pattern of chain link and stopped growing when it achieved the full shape of a cross. Okay, super weird. But again, just the beginning. Yes, some of the more vocally superstitious residents of Pulaski County called for the tombstone to be removed, claiming supernatural origins for the markings on the stone. But those appeals went unheeded. A few months later, a group of boys were riding their bicycles past the cemetery, and 11-year-old James Collins, in response to a dare, proved that he wasn't afraid of any of the scary stories that surrounded Carl Pruitt and his haunted tombstone by throwing a bunch of rocks at it, and causing some damage to the marble. Satisfied that the dare was answered, the boys rode off. But moments later, by causes unknown, little Jimmy's bike sped up uncontrollably, and no matter how he tried to avoid it, Jimmy rode right into a tree and was thrown from the bike. Somehow during the crash, the bicycle chain separated from the sprockets of the bicycle and wrapped around Jimmy's neck, strangling him to death. When the boys reported exactly what had happened, police refused to believe them for the most unusual reason. The boys were accused of lying because the police could find no damage to the Pruitt tombstone, despite every boy in the group claiming to have witnessed with their own eyes chips of marble flying off it as the rocks hit it. The belief in the cursed tombstone began to take over the small community, and as with every curse, there will always be loud detractors who need to prove they have no fear. Jimmy Collins was a kid responding to a dare, but local farmer Fred Williams was just a father of 3 passing by the cemetery on his horse-drawn carriage with his wife and kids. Apparently he had grown tired of hearing all the tall tales about the cursed Pruitt tombstone, so he decided to announce his bravery, unprompted. Williams took up his rifle and fired several shots at the tombstone, causing serious damage. Suddenly spooked by the shots, his horses took off at a high rate of speed. Williams' wife and kids were thrown from the carriage, but Williams held fast, believing he could get the horses to stop. But he would have no such luck. The horses veered off the road, struck a log that blocked their path, and Williams was thrown forward, where he became entangled in the reins that lashed the horses together, and he was killed when a 2-foot lead chain that connected the bridles became wrapped around his neck, snapping his spine. As the family walked back to town for help, they passed the cemetery, only to see the tombstone that had been so badly damaged just minutes before was again completely intact. Okay, so when this story circulated, the mother of the young boy, Jimmy Collins, who was the first victim, she decided to end the curse once and for all. She went to the cemetery with a sledgehammer and crushed the marble to pebbles. Unfortunately, she would never be seen alive again. On her walk home in the dark, Mrs. Collins inadvertently crossed through a neighbor's backyard and didn't notice the laundry line was out. It was a thin black chain instead of the usual white canvas line, and that made it invisible in the dark. And Mrs. Collins soon found herself fighting for her life with the laundry line wrapped around her neck. Unable to scream, no one came to her rescue, and she was found dead the following morning. Oh, and the tombstone that was reduced to rubble was once again brand new. Okay, so that's 3 deaths attributed to this cursed tombstone, and the cops decided they needed to do something about it. I mean, they needed to at least investigate the claims, right? So they sent 2 officers to see what the hell was going on. But these cops, they were young and foolish and didn't take seriously the reports that a ghost was haunting his own tombstone and committing murders. Instead of investigating, they just walked around and made jokes. When they left, the driver of the cop car noticed that they were being followed by a strange bright light. The faster they went, the closer the light got to the car. Not paying full attention to the road, the driver swerved off toward a private driveway whose entrance was between 2 posts in the ground. As the car plowed into the driveway, it crashed and rolled over several times, ejecting both of the occupants. The passenger survived unhurt, but the driver somehow became entangled in the chain that connected the two posts to prevent cars from entering the private drive. The force of the chain around the officer's neck was enough to decapitate him. Now things got to a point where people were terrified to even drive by the cemetery, let alone stop by to visit deceased loved ones. The entire place was thought to be cursed, and so it became abandoned and overgrown in a matter of months. Then one day, a local man named Arthur Lewis decided he'd had enough. With a hammer and chisel, Mr. Lewis systematically, completely destroyed the tombstone, all the way to dust, according to the story. The people who lived within earshot of the cemetery could hear the distinct sounds of steel on stone for hours, and became rather confident that this might mean an end to the curse. But then the sounds of marble being worked was replaced by the terrified shrieks of a dying man. Concerned, a group of locals turned up with lanterns to find out what had befallen Mr. Lewis, only to discover him strangled to death with the chain used to secure the entrance to the grounds wrapped tightly around his neck. No explanation was ever given for the untimely death of Arthur Lewis. 5 total tombstone deaths. Apparently, that's what it takes for the town council to do anything. It was announced that all human remains interred in that particular cemetery were to be moved and reburied in another location in town. Everyone, that is, except Carl Pruitt. Pruitt's body, casket, and tombstone remained. Well, for the next 20 years at least. In 1958, the area was approved for strip mining for coal, and the tombstone of Carl Pruitt was lost forever. Like I said, more on this story as my research continues, and please keep a lookout for the wrap-up to my summer vacation. Thanks for listening to The Devil Within. Please make sure you're following the show wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. You could also check out our socials at The Devil Within Pod on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Until next time, stay safe out there. The Devil Within is a Cloud 10 Media production, recorded live at Bel Air Studios in Los Angeles, California. Written and produced by Brandon Morgan. Executive produced by Sim Sarna. Our post-production supervisor is Bruce Whitkin, who also provided original music for this episode. For The Devil Within, I'm your host, Brandon Morgan.